Hello and welcome to another AARP Arizona Happy Hour virtual tour. I am Brenda with the Arizona State Office of AARP. We are the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that is dedicated to empowering people 50 and older to choose how they live as they age. With a nationwide presence, AARP strengthens communities and advocates for what matters most to the more than 100 million Americans 50 plus and their families: health security, financial stability, and personal fulfillment. AARP also produces the nation's largest circulation publications, the AARP Magazine and the AARP Bulletin. During this month, AARP will offer events and enriching experiences close to home and from your home that help you make connections and serve others. While our situations are different, our need for connection is universal. Now more than ever, we know that connecting with family and friends is vital to aging well and living longer and having happier lives. Visit us at aarp.org/AZ for more information. Thank you again for attending, and with that, I will turn things over to Marshall.
Folks, welcome to the show. Get ready to meet your host for the night, Arizona's very own hip historian himself, Marshall Shore.
Hello and good evening. I want to welcome you all to Arizona History Happy Hour. I am so glad that you can be here on this evening. So I want to welcome you all, whether you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch. You could be listening on Spotify or even via iTunes. So happy that you can join us. My name is Marshall Shore. I am indeed your host for this evening. And today is October 26th. Now, it's kind of a cool day because there's been this is kind of an important day for Arizona history. Why, back in 1881, today marks the day where the Earps Doc Holliday faced off against the Clattons, the McClarys, and Billy Claiborne of the Cowboy faction in an empty lot near the OK Corral. Now, this was back when Arizona was still a territory, and that fight that lasted approximately 30 seconds has changed Western history and Western lore and mythos. It is also Pumpkin Day. There's a frenzy going on for pumpkin right now. We're obsessed. We're waiting for a holiday coming up in November that's famous for pumpkin pie. We're getting ready for a holiday just in a couple days that is famous for jack-o'-lanterns. But we have this need for everything pumpkin, whether it's lattes, bars, cookies, coffee, cheesecake, pasta, oatmeal, pumpkin patches, festivals, bake-offs, TV specials, going back to Charlie Brown. So, gather around the TV or gather around the jack-o'-lantern and just celebrate pumpkins. It is also Howl at the Moon Day. Now, this is not just about a Halloween trick or treat, depending on how you look at it, but it's to raise awareness of those organizations and groups that care for wolves and their conservation. So they're trying to do this while having a bit of fun. So, you might want to give a little howl tonight to remember all those folks that keep wolves around. Now, it is also Horseless Carriage Day. Carriages used to be pulled by animals, usually horses, sometimes other creatures. And a horseless carriage is a mechanical device that powers a carriage. And the reason why we celebrate on today is because back in 1769, an English author wrote in his diary that he had just heard of an invention about a machine that drove without horses. Now, it is also Chicken Fried Steak Day. Whether it was a mix-up back in 1911 between the order of fried or steak, fried, that became an icon in Texas and has become nationally famous, whether it's rolled in flour or breadcrumbs, maybe egg, maybe not egg, then fried in a pan and then smothered with country gravy. Let's eat. All right. Well, what can you expect from tonight's show? Well, we've got, of course, a little bit of music history. We've got Little Arizona. We have some trivia, and it wouldn't be happy hour with an amazing guest, and we do not disappoint this evening. I am so happy, but we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So, I said my name is Marshall. I'm also known as the Hip Historian, and I'm excited because I get to celebrate Arizona history every single day. And so coming up early January, we are going to be celebrating 95 years of Orpheum Theater by doing Arizona Unzipped. On Halloween, I will be out in Scottsdale near the Valley Ho for Driveway of Death. I have some friends that might be watching tonight unless they're busy prepping. And, they've been doing this for almost 2 decades. And it's great because some folks came as children and now they're bringing their kids. They turn their driveway into a haunted house for basically 24 hours. And so that will be a lot of fun. Also coming up, Saturday, November 18th, out in Desert Breeze Park in Chandler, I'm going to be the MC for Chandler Pride. And then, I've probably talked more ball history or sports ball in the last couple days than I've talked in quite a while. We just did a podcast with Lynn Ames, who wrote Out at the Plate, the Dot Wilkinson story, that really is talking about Dot Wilkinson, who is the foremost women's athlete still in Arizona. She just passed away at the age of 101, and it's quite a story. So you can listen to that on Spotify, as well as iTunes. And I will be putting a link to it in Marshall Shore Hip Historian on Facebook as well. So be sure to check that out. And also, when you're out there collecting history, you never know quite what you're going to find. And so I've discovered some things that I thought were VHS. Well, they're a little different size. It's a Betamax. So I would love if someone has a Betamax machine that's working that I can borrow for a little bit of time to record and digitize what I found on those tapes. Let me know if you have access to one, and you can do that through either Facebook, Instagram, email, or via my website, All Hip Historian. And so I look forward to hearing from you. So, here at Happy Hour, it would not be Happy Hour without a beverage. And PJ came through, as we talk about it being National Pumpkin Day, indeed it is. And so we have PSL, not pumpkin spice latte, but pumpkin spiced libation. So this has tequila, sherry, coconut cream, coffee liqueur, pumpkin real, as well as some ground nutmeg. That's tasty. I'm sure he's serving that somewhere, maybe even right at the moment. All right. As we get ready for Little Arizona, we are going to talk about a town called Williams, which is in Coconino County, has a little over 3,200 residents, was established back in 1881. Now, it was founded and named for William Shirley Old Bill Williams, a famous trapper, trader, scout, and mountain man who trapped up in that area. And so if you go, there is indeed a statue of Old Bill in Monument Park, as well as it's on Route 66, as you can see by this map there. Now, what I think is interesting is as Route 66, it actually was the last place because of a lawsuit about Highway 40 when it was coming through. So it was the last place to lose Route 66. The year later, it was decommissioned. Now, also, if you go up there, you're not far from Arizona, which has bears, mountain goats, bison, birds of prey. It's a lot of fun. If you've never been, it's well worth the drive. And, you know, when you talk about Williams, it is also called the gateway to the Grand Canyon because indeed you can take from Williams and the old Harvey House, you can get on a train and take that all the way to the Grand Canyon, which is spectacular. And it's getting now to be weather where you really want to do that. It's going to be beautiful watching those fall colors change. So well worth an adventure to Williams, Arizona. And now is the time we actually get to hear from someone else that isn't me. So let me go ahead and bring on my friend Brendan. Hold on just a moment. Hello.
Hello, Marshall. How are you?
I'm good. And yourself?
Oh, doing just fine. Enjoying this cooler weather.
Oh, indeed. So, Brent, for folks who don't know anything about you, tell us a little about yourself.
So I am an associate professor in the School of Transborder Studies at Arizona State, and I'm a linguist and anthropologist. I work mostly on issues of language, culture, and education in schooling, especially with Mexican American and other Latino families. But more recently, I've been working on language diversity in professional baseball.
And let's see. And I think you actually maybe even written a book about it.
I may have written a book about it. Yes, this is my book called Multilingual Baseball, Language Learning Identity and Intercultural Communication in the Transnational Game. Currently available only in a very expensive library quality hardcover edition and ebook, but there is a paperback and cheaper ebook coming in the future. So stay tuned.
Very good. And, you know, I think it's interesting that we're having this discussion. I mean, literally just the day before the World Series starts with our very own Diamondbacks playing.
Yeah, the Diamondbacks back in the World Series for the first time since 2001. And I remember well when they faced off against the hated Yankees that year. That was pretty exciting.
Oh, those darn New Yorkers
are. I know, yeah.
All right. Well, so we're getting ready to do some trivia. And so, you know, happy hour trivia is a little different than if you're used to bar trivia. So it's not so much. So we've got our questions that are multiple choice. So, you know, if you don't know the answer, just pick one. You might be able to figure out which one, even if you don't know what the topic is. But the beauty is we'll take a bit of a break when we're done and then come back and we'll launch into the stories of the answers. And for me, that's where all the magic really happens. And so you can keep track of in the trivia. Some folks keep track of it in the chat room. Some folks do it in a special notebook. Whatever makes you happy, just do it. The whole goal is to just learn about Arizona in different ways. All right, so let's start off with our first question, which is spring training in Arizona or the Cactus League began when? Was it A, 1947, B, 1951, C, 1959, or D, 1961? So when do you think spring training in Arizona or the Cactus League, when did it all start? Right here. All right. Question 2. During World War II, organized baseball was played by Japanese American prisoners in concentration camps. In which 2 areas within Arizona? Was it A, Navajo Nation and Coconino County, B, the Gila River Indian Reservation and the Colorado River Indian Reservation, C, the Salt River Pima Maricopa Reservation, Pima County, or D, Santa Cruz County and Tohono O'odham Nation? So where do you think that there were Japanese Americans playing baseball in those camps? All right. On to question 3. The most valuable Arizona-born player in Major League Baseball history by total wins above replacement is A. Cody Bellinger, B. John Denny, C. Ian Kinsler, or D. Andre Ether. So who do you think is the most valuable Arizona-born player in the major leagues? All right. Question 4. The 1989 comedy Major League was filmed in Tucson. Is that true or false? Question 5. This year in the city of Parker, who hosted which installment of the annual All-Indian Baseball Tournament? Was it A, the first, B, the 8th, C, the 24th, or D, the 67th? All right, coming down off that halfway point, here we are at question 6. Esteban Bellan. All right. The first known Latino player in U.S. professional baseball debuted in which year? Was it A, 1869, B, 1901, C, 1912, or D, 1955? All right. Question 7. The Diamondbacks' first season was A, 1991, B, 1994, C, 1998, or D, 1999? All right. Question 8. The Diamondbacks are the fastest expansion team in Major League Baseball history to win a World Series. And will they do it again? But that's not part of this question. That's because we're not looking into the future yet. All right. So is that true or false that they are indeed the fastest expansion team in history to win a World Series? Question 9. The D-backs are the only major professional sports team from Arizona to win a championship. Is that true or false? All right. And question 10. What's the jersey number of Bobby Freeman, the Diamondbacks organist? Is it A1, B12, C88, or D00? All right. So while you are locking in all those answers, we are going to take a little bit of an Arizona music break. And I thought, since we are talking about baseball and organs, let's talk about one of my favorite stops, Organ Stop Pizza out in Mesa. Oh my gosh, if you haven't been, it's well worth it. But they have been around since 1972. The first one was here in Phoenix, and it was started by a land developer who loved theater organs and their music. Okay. And so he came up with this idea of pizza and a Wurlitzer organ. Now, that first organ actually came from Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood. It was such a huge success that in 1975, he opened up a restaurant in Mesa, and things were going splendid. And then he decided he would take a break. So he retired and sold the business to one of his employees, who then took that organ and just kept adding and adding and adding until eventually creating the world's largest Wurlitzer organ. And then in 1995, they moved to a building built specifically to house the organ. And oh my gosh, if you haven't been out there, it is a magical experience. They have pizza, you can get ice cream, and just sit there. You can request songs from Scott. It's such an amazing adventure. Have you been out there?
Oh, I sure have. And what the picture doesn't show you is that, where the organist is sitting is this rotating platform that also rises out of the floor. I mean, it is a sensory assault, and I mean that as a compliment. I mean, you go there and you are hit with a tsunami of organ music. I remember bringing my daughter there when she was like 2 or 3, and the child was like, "What is happening?" But then we brought her back a little bit later, and she really loved it. But yeah, I mean, it's the scale of the Wurlitzer organ they have. I'm a piano player and a player of instruments with keys, which is in part why I added the question about the Diamondbacks organist. So I have a special interest in this kind of thing. The scale of the organ has to be seen to be believed.
I love that it's like 360. It's like there's pipes behind you. Everywhere you look, there's an instrument attached to it, whether it's drums, things hanging from the ceiling.
Yeah, it's impressive. Actually, one of my lesser known titles, Marshall, in addition to being a professor, I am one of the official university carillonneurs at ASU. So ASU has a carillon, which is like an organ except with bells instead of pipes. It's in the basement of Old Main. Oh, nice. And every once in a while, if you're really lucky, they're trying to get this going again after COVID. There'll be a little carillon concert or sing along where you might see me or one of the organ students from the School of Music playing what is not as large as the Organ Stop Pizza organ, but is a pretty large carillon that takes up a good chunk of the basement of Old Main.
Let me know when that's going on. I mean, especially as we get closer to the holidays, I'm assuming that's when it becomes really popular. And
we usually do a holiday sing-along or something like that.
Let me know when that is. I would love to show up and be a part of that.
Absolutely. I'll keep you posted.
Yeah. I mean, so if you haven't been to Organ Stop, it is well worth a visit. And like you were saying, there's birthday parties there for infants to 80-year-olds and beyond. It's fun, family friendly, great times. So go check it out. All right. So now we're ready for some answers. All right. So our first question. So, question 1, spring training in Arizona or the Cactus League began when?
All the way back in 1947, although we have a more contemporary photo here. And, the story which might or might not be apocryphal about how it started comes from Bill Veck, famous owner of the White Sox, one of the original Cactus League teams. And the story, at least as Veck told it, was that he got tired of the racism and the racial segregation at spring training sites in Florida. That I think he wrote in his autobiography that he had been he was a white guy but he was sitting in the black section at one of the segregated spring training games, and someone, of the authorities or stadium security or somebody was giving him a hard time about it. And so in his telling, he got fed up with Florida and decided to start an alternate site in Arizona. And this was also because, 1947, a well-known year in the history of integration and racial integration in modern baseball. Veck was planning on bringing more African-American players into the, he was with Cleveland at that point, the Indians. Larry Doby, who was one of the first black players to follow Jackie Robinson in the major leagues, was signed to Cleveland soon after that. And, in Veck's telling, he wanted spring training to happen somewhere different. So that's the story.
And right now, the Mesa Historical Museum has a great exhibit up about the buckhorn baths.
Oh, yeah. That was the original sort of base of operations.
Indeed. And so they didn't care who was staying there. So that was part of that. So it's a great piece of that baseball history.
One of my students, actually, this is sort of possible counter argument to Veck's version of history, but one of my graduate students at ASU, Oscar Mancinas, who grew up in the Washington Escobedo neighborhood of Mesa, was telling me before that people in his neighborhood, it's a largely Mexican-American neighborhood historically, but that people in the neighborhood have stories from the past, from their childhoods, of Black players from the Cubs actually staying with families in the neighborhood because in certain areas, at least, it was hard for them to find a motel to stay in. So, Hall of Famers like Ernie Banks and Fergie Jenkins, at least according to these oral histories from Oscar's neighborhood, at one point were staying with families there. That neighborhood is very close to what's now Hohokam Stadium, where the A's play.
Wow. All right. All right. Question 2. During World War II, organized baseball was played by Japanese American prisoners in concentration camps in which 2 areas within Arizona?
Yep, Gila River and the Colorado River reservations. And I just put a photo that I took last year at the Arizona Heritage Museum in Papago Park of just a phenomenal small exhibit they had about the history of Japanese American baseball in the camps, with uniform from one of the teams and a team picture. So yeah, actually the Arizona camps were the only ones that were built on Native American reservations. So the Gila River one, and then the Colorado River one was quite a ways north from Yuma. That one was called Poston.
So yeah, no, it's like, so you've got the Heritage Center has done a couple of things on that, as well as the Chandler History Museum.
Oh, I didn't
has
realize
done a variety
that.
of things, more on the concentration camps themselves.
Yeah, they had some really amazing artifacts from that time. They even had home plate from one of the 2 camps from the field there. And one of the things that was interesting was that the camps were sort of all over the western part of the United States. And the teams from the Arizona camps, for example, would travel for championships and playoffs to other internment camps in different parts of the western United States for tournaments and that sort of thing. So just kind of an interesting little bit of that very troubling history.
Indeed. And so, yeah, I mean, from my understanding, it was like basically you had this artificial line, and if you lived south of that line, you went to the camps. If you lived north of that line, you didn't go to the camps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, all right. And question 3, the most valuable Arizona player born player in the major leagues baseball history by total wins above replacement is, now before you answer, what is wins above replacement?
I was going to say that. So wins above replacement is a contemporary baseball statistic that tries to account for the entirety of a player's contributions to their team by bringing together offense, defense, and base running, at least for position players, as opposed to pitchers. So, it comes out of the field of sabermetrics, which is sort of the area of statistics that tries to separate what a player actually has control over versus what a player doesn't have control over, to be able to quantify their overall contribution to their team over time, in terms of if you pile it all together, how many more wins would it be worth over the course of someone's season or someone's career? Like if you took Ian Kinsler out of a game, in a given season, and you replaced him with Joe Schmo from AAA, how much would the team be giving up? So that is the story. Ian Kinsler actually has a huge lead in this category among Arizona-born players. He's somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 wins above replacement for his career. But keep an eye on Marcelo Meyer, infield prospect for the Boston Red Sox, who is Arizona born, is very young still, was just drafted a couple years ago, but is looking like a future star. So at some point he may overtake Kinsler.
Wow. All right. So question 4, the 1989 comedy Major League was filmed in Tucson.
That is true. And I've included a picture of High Corbett Field in Reed Park in Tucson, where the spring training scenes in the movie Major League were filmed. Now, as you can see, it's where the U of A baseball team plays. But during my years in Tucson, there were still 3 major league teams that were doing spring training in the Tucson area. So the Colorado Rockies at that point were using High Corbett Field in Reed Park as their spring training destination. And then, unfortunately, teams in Phoenix got tired of traveling to Tucson and vice versa. And the Valley just sort of vacuumed up all the teams. But yeah, High Corbett Field is where you can go see the Wildcats play, and famously featured in the film Major League.
All right. Question 5. This year, the city of Parker hosted which installment of the annual All-Indian Baseball Tournament?
The 67th annual All-Indian Baseball Tournament. And I wanted to include this as a shout out to my friend and fellow anthropologist, Philip Stevens, who's from the San Carlos Apache Reservation, also very active in the amateur Indian baseball circuit. And I've seen some of the games played over in San Carlos. But this is just a reminder that professional baseball is not the only meaningful form of baseball or softball around. There are these sometimes ethnically oriented baseball cultures with really, really long histories in Arizona and elsewhere. So yeah, the 67th annual year of the All-Indian Baseball Tournament in Parker, Arizona. And if you've been to any city parks in Tucson, you can also see Mexican and Mexican-American amateur baseball teams and leagues where people can really play, and they're really good, and they've got uniforms, and it's taken very seriously. A wonderful new recent book called Mexican-American Fast Pitch, about Mexican-American fast pitch softball culture, out from Stanford University Press or University of California Press within the last couple of years. So this is something that, researchers who are interested in baseball and sort of the vitality of different cultures within the Southwest are tuning into more.
Well, and also it's like, I just was talking to Len Ames, who wrote a book about Dot Wilkinson, a catcher for the Ramblers.
Yeah.
And so really talking about that softball, that fast pitch softball history.
That's right.
With women. So like movies League of Their Own, that was going on right here. And in fact, the city of Phoenix will be naming a ball field for Dot Wilkinson at some point in the future, which is very exciting. So yeah,
that's wonderful.
All right. So Esteban Bayan. See, I got it right. All right.
Nice.
The first known Latino player in the U.S. professional baseball debuted in which year? Oh my gosh.
1869, just after the Civil War. So this is not strictly speaking an Arizona fact, but just because of the Latino presence and history in Arizona, I wanted to include this because I talk about Esteban Bayan, who, if you go to the Baseball Hall of Fame's website, is still listed as Steve Bayan in their database. But Esteban Bayan, who is if memory serves, in the back row all the way to the right, was from sort of an upper class Catholic Cuban family at a time when the Cuban elites were trying to distance themselves from the Spanish colonial government. And so we're sending a lot of younger men to the United States for education. So he ended up at prep school, basically at what's now Fordham in New York City. my sister's alma mater, and then ended up playing professionally for the Troy Haymakers about 15, 20 minutes from where I grew up in upstate New York in 1869. Left in 1871, 72, and then helped to start professional baseball and sort of nurture baseball culture back in Cuba. So, this idea that, Spanish speakers, people of color, Native Americans are a new thing in baseball is really in a lot of ways an artifact of the black-white color line that just sort of descended in baseball and then erased this very early and very diverse history.
Wow. All right. Question 7. The Arizona Diamondbacks' first season was?
1998, not that long ago.
No, not that long ago at all.
Not that long ago at all. And this also leads into the next question.
Indeed. So the Diamondbacks are the fastest growing expansion team in Major League Baseball history to win a World Series.
It is true. It only took them, 4 years, right? I'm doing the math in my head, 2000, from 98, 99, 2000, 2001. So in the 4th year of their existence, they won a World Series. I mean, expansion teams are when they create a new team in a new city, and there's an expansion draft, which means the other existing teams can protect some of their players, but not all of their players. But you're building a team from scratch, essentially, or from the sort of cast-offs of other teams. And so often, my own most beloved baseball team, the Kansas City Royals, came into existence in 1969, did not win a World Series until 1985, and then won again back in 2015. But like the Texas Rangers, who the Diamondbacks will be facing in the World Series, have never won a championship. So there's a lot of expansion teams that have never been able to win the Rockies came into existence around the time the D-backs did, the Tampa Bay Rays. Neither of those franchises has won a World Series. So this was a pretty exceptional thing, especially facing that Yankees dynasty that was almost unbeatable back in the early 2000s.
Right. All right. So question 9, the Diamondbacks are the only major professional sports team from Arizona to win a championship.
So it's false. It was a little bit of a trick question. They are the only men's major professional sports team in the sports that are considered, quote unquote, major sports to win a championship. But of course, there were those dominant Mercury teams from a few years back. So here's a shot of the Phoenix Mercury with Diana Taurasi holding the championship trophy from the WNBA. And then Marshall, you mentioned when we were chatting before the podcast that if we expand this into amateur and semi-pro sports, we have a few more championships to point to.
Right. The Ramblers, which again goes back to Dot Wilkinson. So, I mean, I've had such a baseball filled week, not even knowing what was going to be coming down the pike when we planned all this. So, yeah. So that's why I thought it's kind of a trick question in several ways. So we'll see who got it right and who got it wrong. All right. And question 10, what's the jersey number of Bobby Freeman, the Diamondbacks organist?
So you got it right if you guessed that it corresponded to the number of keys on a piano. All the white keys and all the black keys, add them together, it makes 88. So I pulled this image of Bobby Freeman, the beloved organist for the Diamondbacks, in this sort of vintage purple and white D-backs jersey from his album Ballpark Hits, which is hard to find on eBay, but do you
have a copy?
I wish I had a copy. I don't have a copy. I want a copy on vinyl. I'm a real analog guy. But yeah, I mean, if you've been to a Diamondbacks game, one of my favorite parts is walking on that upper concourse where you can walk right up to the organ and watch Bobby playing. Really, really cool. Not every ballpark, not every stadium still has a real life organist. And he's been doing it since the beginning. So just again, another nod to my love of the piano and the organ. So there you have it.
So I know one of the things we talked about was the language. And so that was kind of one of the things that brought you into writing the book. So can you talk a little bit about language of the players? Because they're coming from all over the place.
They're coming from all over the place. Yeah. And one of the things that happens, the major league teams have their academies in the Dominican Republic where they kind of bring all of their newly signed teenage young players from all around Latin America. So that's one dimension of language diversity, is then you have Dominican, Venezuelan, sometimes Mexican and Colombian, all different varieties of Spanish sort of concentrated in one place. And then those players may have already started learning English in school or, just on their own time, but then they're doing English as a second language classes, basically, when they're in the academies. A lot of them are also working on high school credits or trying to finish their, kind of like the GED. But then, one thing that I talk about quite a bit in the book is that when those guys come to the United States and then all of a sudden they're put together with players who have been drafted out of American high schools or American colleges and universities, you've got a tremendous amount of language diversity within the clubhouse. And, sometimes, at least based on the research I did, that leads to sort of cliques based on language and nationality, where, of course, if you're in a new country for the first time and you're sort of surrounded by a different culture, different language, you might tend to stick together with people who speak a language that's familiar and have a familiar background. But, also a lot of stories from both sides, from the US side and the Latin American side, of players really making an effort to learn either English or Spanish and then cross those lines to bring the team together, which was a major theme that came out, at least of talking to players who had done that, was, the team is going to be a better team. They're going to be more unified. We're going to get to know each other better. And that's going to benefit us on the field if we can sort of build this culture of communication and collaboration across these lines of language and, nationality and ethnicity and the clubhouse. So, and then, of course, not everybody just speaks English and Spanish. You have players who speak Japanese and Korean and different varieties of Chinese. So it gets pretty complicated. You have a lot of players who come already multilingual. So some team staffers that I talked to would mention, oh yeah, like we have a player that comes from Aruba and he speaks Dutch and Spanish and Papiamentu, which is the Creole language of Aruba, and English. And, I interviewed a player who was from the Dominican Republic, but from very close to the border with Haiti. And he said, well, I used to go to the market with my grandma growing up and it was right on the border. And, so she would speak Creole, Haitian Creole. So I learned Creole and I would use it to talk to my friends back there. So, even just to say, well, there's English and Spanish is kind of misleading because there's so much more going on under the surface.
So what about, so they're coming here with language, but other cultural things like food would be a huge thing.
Food is a huge thing. And, one thing that was interesting about doing this book for me as an ethnographer or an anthropologist, somebody who's interested in culture and how it connects to language, was seeing things from the point of view of an athlete. I like to run, but I wasn't a tremendously successful athlete. I became a professor, right? I didn't, a couple of my sisters both ran at the college level, ran cross country and track, and my brother became a pretty serious distance runner. made it to the Olympic trials, but I was not at that level. So coming to see things from the point of view of an athlete, part of that was understanding how critical food is, not just because you want food when you're in a new place that you like and that, maybe tastes a little bit like home. But because of the fact that like taking care of your body when you're in this extremely demanding process of training and player development, if you can't get the language skills to have the access to the food that you need to continue operating at that elite level, you're really in trouble. So I sort of experienced this when I went to the Dominican Republic. I did some research with, young baseball prospects and education staff and player development staff at the Kansas City Royals Professional Academy. So I was hanging out there for about a week, just kind of doing everything the players did and interacting with them in class, watching them in class, watching how they trained. And I ate in the cafeteria, and the amount of food and the heaviness of the food that these 17-year-old guys needed to sort of keep them going through the day, I felt like I was going to explode after 2 days there. My body is not built for that, but it sort of helped me to feel how different it is when you're an elite athlete. So, a couple of the guys that I talked to, and also some of the English teachers or like education program directors that I talked to mentioned how, one of the very basic things is knowing how to ask for the food that you need when you come to the United States. The restaurant Chipotle came up a lot because on the one hand, it's a restaurant where you can point to things because everything is right in front of you. On the other hand, it's also a restaurant where the food sort of resembles Latin American food to a certain extent. There's like rice and meat and some vegetables, and it's somewhat close to what players might be used to from home. So, but I talked to a couple guys who were joking about how hard it was when they first came here. This one, I think it was a Cuban guy I was talking to, was like joking about how like even when he went to Chipotle at first, he really struggled to use the English he had to say what he needed. And then he said, yeah, I heard about a guy, it might've been a friend of his, like the only word he learned was hamburgers. So when he came here for the first 2 months, all he ate was hamburgers because he couldn't figure out how to ask for anything else. I wasn't sure about that. I thought maybe he could have pointed to the menu. I don't know what the story was, but that the sort of, feeling the pinch of really needing a certain kinds of food and certain amounts of food to keep operating, at that elite level is pretty important, and if you're at a team facility, like if you're at the academy in the Dominican or at one of the instructional league facilities here in Arizona, of course the team has a dietitian and a cafeteria and they feed you, but then, you get sent to the minor leagues in like Montana or South Carolina or somewhere, and then you got to fend for yourself, right? And you don't have that that support built in.
Well, right. And I had a friend who was working with the Brewers as their dietitian and was really working with the young men coming over because again, like they couldn't necessarily get all the ingredients they needed. So to help them understand what they could get here, how to incorporate things, also maybe making them more healthy. So, yeah. So, that's part of culture is just that food. So, yeah. So, I think it's so cool that it's like that kind of came out of even just looking at linguistics, that like the story, it might not be completely true, but there is some resonance with it.
Yeah. There's language touches just about everything, a lot of the teams, at least the teams that I had contact with, really thought about education and then also language education as like a life skill for their players because, it's sort of hard to imagine how young a lot of the players are when they get signed until you have contact with them. And then it's like, oh my gosh, like, by the time, this player is like 19 or 20, they were living with their family and then they were living in an academy, which is sort of like summer camp for baseball. You know what I mean? I mean, it's like hard work, but with a very regimented schedule, but you're there with all the other players and you're there with all the staff who are working with you, you know, and then all of a sudden you're kind of on your own, maybe in some small town in the rural United States, and you got to figure out how to fend for yourself. You have to figure out, you know, how to do all the stuff that you need to do, stuff that I wasn't very good at doing at the age of 19 or 20 without, you know, being subjected to this punishing regimen of training and games and travel and, you know, needing to get rest. So it's, it really, that was another theme that came up in a lot of the conversations I had, not so much with players. Players tend to be pretty stoic about this kind of thing in my experience, but with team staff was just, man, we ask so much of them, and often at such a young age, you know, the expectations for learning language and using language, but then also the expectations for just being able to sort of survive on your own.
Yeah, I go again. So they've never been out of that household.
Yeah, depending on the kid, but yeah, it's really interesting.
Indeed. So people should definitely check out your book. Maybe wait until it comes out in not in hardcover, but actually,
yes, or see if you can get your local library to purchase a copy. That's a thing that people can do that they don't always realize, is ask your local librarian. Usually there's someone, you know, whose job is acquisitions. You can ask them to buy a copy, either an electronic copy, which is kind of nice because then lots of people have access to it, or a hard copy for the library. And but otherwise, yes, next year the paperback will be coming out, and I'm hoping to I'll be doing some speaking events around the state for Arizona Humanities related to my book and the theme of multilingual baseball. Also hoping to do some local events at Changing Hands Books, you know, and other places around the valley, just to get the word out about it.
Very cool. Well, I always like to end with this segment with just asking folks how they did, but you know, just by joining us and answering questions, you are a winner. It doesn't matter what your score is. Look at all the stories you have now. So now when you go to those World Series parties, you know more about the history of baseball in Arizona and just kind of that transborder side of it as well. So Brendan, thank you so much for coming on and sharing, I mean, obviously your passion.
Thank you, Marshall. Yeah, as you can see, baseball and linguistics are two things I could talk about endlessly. So I'm always grateful for an opportunity to do that. So thanks for having me on, and thank you to everybody else for tuning in.
Very good. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Yes, same to you.
Oh my gosh, you know, that was so amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. So, you know, with the World Series approaching, I thought it would be kind of fun, since we talked a little bit about the Ramblers and what was going on. So, you know, back in 1951, there indeed was World Championship going on right here, a World Series of softball with the Ramblers, as well as a team named the California Ebonics. And so I kind of wondered, so I found this and I was like, well, you know, where was Rambler Field? And it basically north on Washington, about 37th Street. So just almost across the street from the Greyhound Park. But it was also just south of the Phoenix Drive-In. And so what was unique, so this was 1951 when teams still played segregated. That was until Billy Harris basically got in and played for another team and basically became our Jackie Robinson, breaking down those racial barriers. So when next time you drive by 37th Street and Washington, you'll know a little bit more about that and how it ties into a World Series, not for the Diamondbacks, which we wish all the luck in the coming days, as well as recognizing the Ramblers. So thank you all so much. As we get ready to say goodnight, I want to say, this is why if you're watching on Facebook, you should definitely be sharing, because look at all the fun we're having. And with World Series and baseball and softball history. So it's a lot of fun. Next week, we have Donna Reiner coming up. That's going to be a really cool show as well. So be sure and check us out next Thursday. 7 o'clock, same bat time, same bat channel. And please reach out to me if you have questions, story suggestions for possible shows, some of my best ideas. And please, if you know of anyone who has a Betamax that I would be able to borrow for a little bit of time, that would be spectacular. So, all right. So I always love to give a shout out to Chris and Cole for that great video they did, as well as PJ for keeping me hydrated, lubricated, and up to date on what's going on. Now, as we get ready to say good night, we did mention the Buckhorn Baths, which is kind of the epicenter of Cactus League spring training here in the Valley. And so we are going to watch a little bit we did with that. Have a good night, everybody.
Hi, I'm Marshall Shore, Arizona's hip historian. We're here on the site of the Buckhorn Baths, which is one of the best kept secrets in Arizona. It's one of the first roadhouses that's still around from the late 30s. Because of the baseball history that's here, you've got this amazing sign that was on the late 50s by Glenn Guyette that's still in amazing shape and still lights up, which is pretty cool. And it's got a lot of taxidermy. It's actually the world's largest collection of Arizona animals taxidermy inside. Now, you'll notice it's kind of worn down on its heels, but there's an effort afoot to try and preserve it. So come along and let's go see what the Buckhorn Baths has to show us.
It was at Bookarukas just 1 week ago tonight. My mama up and she run away. Now I'm asking you, my brother, just confidentially, have you...
Can you imagine having to live somewhere and haul your water for miles? Well, Ted Slager did just that, got tired of hauling water every day, so they drilled a well. And when they did that, they discovered mineral water. And so with that mineral water, they decided, let's open up some cottages. And it became a resort long before Arizona was covered in resorts. Here we are in the Buckhorn Mineral Wells, which is part of the Buckhorn Baths. This would be the spa. So this was an era of gender segregation. So you have all these rooms on this side that were meant for men, and all these rooms on this side were meant for the women.
Shadows are falling around me. Purple is turning to gray. My heart keeps yearning to soon be returning to someone at the close of a day. Shine on Rocky Mountain moonlight, shine upon the one who waits.
Here we are in the baseball room, where many famous baseball players would come and relax before spring training. So you had folks from the New York Giants and Chicago Cubs. You had Ty Cobb, Gaylord Perry, Willie Mays. All would relax here in their private section of the Buckhorn Baths.
May your outfit be prime and your horse the best you ever sat aboard. So long, good luck, and an easy trail